evening. Welcome to Next Stage. Nice to see you all here. It's a great night. My name is Maria Basescu. I'm the new Executive Director of Next Stage Arts Project. I'd like to bring up a colleague of mine whose original vision has been so instrumental in launching this project. Billy Strauss, Putney resident, world-renowned, talented, creative guy, is going to come up and introduce our guest tonight. So, thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to be pretty quick. A couple of thank yous about tonight's event. First of all, to Dee Dee Cummings, who's sitting right here, who is behind the scenes in so many different ways with so many different great events that happen in Brattleboro and in Putney and all over Windham County. So a big thank you to you, Dee Dee, for pulling all the pieces of this together. I need to thank VPR and NHPR, who have both been incredibly supportive of David's book and this event, as well as a lot of the events that are happening here. You guys may have heard Jane Lindholm or Virginia Prescott interview David over the last week, and those were great pieces, so we definitely want to extend thanks to them. Jeff Potter and Richard Henke at the Commons have both written extensively about this event as well as other Next Stage events, so we're indebted to them. And John Potter at the Reformer, of course, who's so on the case and is always, it seems like every event he treats as the first and most important event that's happening in the area. And I feel like we're very lucky to have these people writing about and talking about the art scene in Windham County. So I just wanted to shout out to them. And I don't know if any of them are here tonight. Some of them may be here tonight. I also want to thank Steve West, who has been also an incredible supporter of Next Stage and Next Stage Arts, as well as this event. I mean, if you listen to Steve's show, he interviews almost every artist that we bring through here, ends up on Steve's show, either in person or remotely. So a huge thank you to him as well. And I think with that, I would like to thank David for allowing us to host his book launch and to host him. It's a very exciting point in time for the book, which I don't know the official release date today or Tuesday. There's another reading coming up next, I think it's the 4th, at Everyone's Books in Brattleboro. So you can check that out. There's another reading in New York City on May 4th, if you happen to be in the city on May 4th, at KGB Bar, I think it's called. I don't know where that is. It's probably downtown, some hip place. But we're very excited that tonight David's here and he's debuting the book here at Next Stage. So.
It takes a village to raise a psychotic, which wasn't realized so far. Thank you, Maria and Billy. And Dee Dee, people talk about Dee Dee. She was the agent, the designer, the publicist. She did everything except have the breakdown, which I had to do myself. But you're having that tonight because she's so nervous. I want to thank Next Stage because 3 Jews are talking to you tonight. It might not have been clear. If you buy the book, another $10 goes to Next Stage. So there's what you gave coming in, and then $10 of what you buy the book for. So that's a good thing. I'm very happy to be reading in Putney because I want to. A lot of you know my wife Wendy O'Connell. A lot of times when people see us together, they know her separately, and they say, "You." Anyway, Wendy and I have a Putney zip code, so we feel like we live in Putney. But the other reason that I like it is because we really do feel part of this community, and it's a great community. And shortly after Jeff Potter, who I think I saw, outed me in the Common as the depressive I am, or was, I got a handwritten letter from a friend in Putney. And she's the kind of person that I think we've known for like 30 years and see once every few months or once a year. And, you talk. And You would feel like close friends. There's so many like that. You feel like really close friends, but you don't really know them. And she sent me this note, which is the other reason we're all here. And at this point, I'm going to put on my glasses. And she says, in our small community, we are all intertwined and tangled. I would be fibbing it if I said I didn't suspect at times that you were not feeling well. I was riveted by your piece in the Commons paper, your honesty and ability to narrow in on a topic that in one way or another touches so many of us. Sharing your writing is a beautiful way to break the silence and get folks talking, engaged, and moving toward, if nothing else, supporting one another as we journey down all paths. So I like that. That's Putney. This book really has about 4 parts. There's the experience itself, and that lasted about 2 years, from October 2005 to October 2007. There's a whole piece on my investigation of the strange worlds of diagnostics, neurotransmitters, alternative medicine, regular medicine. There's also my reflections on what depression means in terms of like creativity, relationship, spirituality. And finally, there's the Dante piece, which he and I have a strange relationship, which continues. So what I thought I'd do is read a little bit for a while, and then we'll see if there are some questions. Then maybe I'll read that creativity stuff. And because of my relationship with Dante, he insists, this is Inferno here, he insists that he gets the last word, so that's how we'll end this. So this is the beginning. This is to put things in context. And it's one of the first chapters, and it's called Words Fail. And the epigraph is, nothing happens to any man that he is not formed by nature to bear. And it's from Marcus Aurelius. I assume everyone can hear me correctly. Okay, good. On Monday morning, October 10th, 2005, I took a 40-milligram tablet of Celexa, cut it in half, and swallowed, presumably with juice or cold coffee. Or I just put my mouth under the faucet to wash it down, one of my less civilized habits. This, unlike many things which followed, was not a particularly crazy thing to do. Since 1999, Celexa had been a potent ally in my balancing act between streams of creative energy and a tendency to disappear into black holes, a cycle that I'd previously been able to self-medicate by using various combinations of exercise, cigarettes, diet, alternative therapies, liquor, meditation, and several varieties of non-prescription drugs. By taking Celexa, I didn't have to be so concerned about my shifting moods, about which version of myself would show up the next day or hour. During the summer of 2005, I decided to take a little break from Celexa. It seemed like a good time. I just left a fairly stressful job. My wife and I continued to successfully negotiate the slings and arrows of 30-year marriage. We owned our own house, had virtually no debt. Plus, I'd begun doing the writing I'd waited many years to do. Why not take the summer to see if my depression was primarily caused by circumstance, stress, or both? But that fall, after 9 months of creativity unleashed, my energy plummeted, my enthusiasm dulled, and the darkness began its inexorable descent. Clearly, my depression was chemical, perhaps seasonal, but if the past were any indication, summers could be just as hard. So, as the familiar foreboding sensation arrived, a soft, pre-gag sensation in the throat that flows up into the tear ducts and down through the chest to the pit of the stomach, I knew this was no time to take any chances. The previous spring, I'd slowly reduced my dose over about 6 weeks. I planned to go up the same way, 20 milligrams every other day for a few days and so on, maybe stopping around 40 or continuing up to 60. I knew the drill. I didn't even bother telling my psychiatrist I was starting up again. I figured he wasn't going to tell me anything we hadn't already discussed before. But by Sunday, I was sitting on the floor with my head in my hands, my agitation barely managed by Valium, telling a long-time friend there was no way I could get on a plane and join him for a business trip to California. I could barely talk. So, I'll try to make it less depressing as we go along. This is from 3 months later, and it's called Looking for Traction. And a friend said this to me, the epigraph. It says, you have to navigate your own personal catastrophe. By January 2006, I was completely back in the belly of the beast, establishing a pattern that held with occasional brief remissions for more than a year. At 4 a.m., 5 at the latest, I'd wake in a panic, my throat and heart vibrating, racing, sometimes in my solar plexus too. I was still exhausted but couldn't get back to sleep, although with enough sedatives I might get another hour or two. When I did get up, I'd get outside as fast as I could. Sometimes I strapped on snowshoes and headed for the woods. Usually I'd just go out the front door and start walking exactly 1.5 miles down the road to where it forks, and then exactly 1.5 miles back. Fast, real fast, sometimes breaking into a run, back, shower, maybe ending with a blast of cold water. Coffee, yeah, I know, but while physically stimulating, it was emotionally comforting. But sometimes, usually decaf, but sometimes the real deal. Some days I had places to go and people to meet, which I managed to pull off with various degrees of success. All professional depressives have their own techniques. For me, it took a combination of careful planning, where I'd be when, occasional rehearsal, oh yeah, this is how humans are supposed to behave, fairly constant dissembling, even to myself if possible, and when all else fails, enough willpower to fake it until you're alone again, or at least back home, where there was no need to pretend otherwise. Around 9:30 or 10 every night, having staggered through another day, I'd go to bed, my mind comfortably numb by a drink or two and an hour or so of empty TV. I'd sit up for a while against the pillows, listening to Wendy get ready for bed, knowing that for at least a few minutes, my emotions wouldn't be a burden to either of us. I didn't want to read. It was too hard to focus anyway. I'd just sink into the luxurious sensation of knowing I could now rest from the battle, no matter how briefly. Like a piece of chocolate you keep rolling around on your tongue until the last taste bud releases its hold, I'd roll around in that drowsy state as long as I could, exhausted, but knowing that the demons were done for the day. They had no fight left. I could drift off whenever I wanted. As hypnagogic images arose, I'd rouse myself enough to enjoy a few more seconds of conscious relief. Those moments were delicious. My sleep would be light, but that was okay. I also loved waking up as often as possible, in the middle of the night, midnight, 1, 2, 3, the sweet realization I could fall back asleep before the jitteriness again reared its chaotic head in the early hours of dawn, which inevitably it did. Okay, now it won't be so depressing. So a few months later, when I had sold the business, I had gotten, like any aging hippie should, I got a VW van, decided to go across the country. And I had 2 really good trips the previous year before all this. So in March, for whatever reason, I decided to head out again. Driven by a little business and a lot of mania, I got in my 1990 VW pop-top camper in March 2006 and started driving towards Southern California. I harbored secret hopes that some warm weather and spring sunshine would cook the agitated depression out of my system. I was neither Jack Kerouac nor Neil Cassidy. I was fueled by neither cigarettes nor amphetamines. I just had to keep moving, as if in some kind of Einsteinian thought experiment. If I could drive as fast as my brain was racing, it might appear that the latter was standing still. I typically drove 500 to 600 miles a day, during which I tried to settle on anything. Which radio station to listen to, where to eat, when to eat, what to eat, where to pull over to nap, whether I could nap, when to call Wendy, if I should call Wendy, if I'd be able to call anybody without my agitated unease spilling over and drowning us both. Usually I'd stick to emails at the end of the day, so I could edit out the more pitiful parts, not that I was fooling anyone. As I drove, I occasionally dictated random observations into the digital tape recorder, obsessively transcribing my words every evening, if only to feel I was accomplishing something, anything. I think about people with PTSD. What do I know about their suffering? I think of friends who have been incapacitated by drugs or mental illness. What do I know about their suffering? I think about my own last 6 months, during which stringing together a few moments, minutes, or hours has been such a relief. Only in those moments, after maybe a week of constantly dealing with this physical anxiety without object, do I realize I'm in pretty deep myself. So I went on this sort of mad trip across the country, and there's some funny scenes, I keep promising. But here's one of the last days. April 7th, 2006. Pratt, Kansas to Marion, Illinois, 659 miles. A year before this trip, while driving in northern Michigan, I picked up a 24-year-old flashback of a 1960s hitchhiker. He was on his way to the annual gathering of the Rainbow Family, which describes itself as the, quote, largest non-organization of non-members in the world. In the course of our conversation, he spoke glowingly of his base commune back in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I thought back on this conversation occasionally over the last year until, through the miracle of mad alchemy, mental alchemy, this, to me, obscure town on the Mississippi had been transformed in my imagination into a cross between Cambridge, Berkeley, and Lourdes, and was filled with people who combined the authenticity of Huck Finn with the wisdom of the Dalai Lama and the healing power of Mother Teresa. Throughout this trip, I've been secretly plotting how to make an innocent detour for this Valhalla. By the time I leave Pratt, Kansas, it has become an obsession. I'm certain I'll soon be surrounded by laid-back aging hippies and their young acolytes, dancing to live music, trailed by hints of marijuana and incense. I'm convinced that my enlightened spirit and tortured heart will prove irresistible to their every healing desire. I picture a comfortable futon, maybe a massage, cool, healing unguents, whatever they are, gently rubbed into my third eye. At the very least, some wine, tofu, and cute girls, or as the hitchhiker put it, righteous women. All I know is that the ephemeral hitchhiker was clearly an incarnation of some powerful Native American medicine man, and my encounter with him was a sign that something magical will happen to me in Cape Girardeau. Arriving on its outskirts, I blast through the commercial strip and soon reach the heart of the city, where I begin slowly driving around looking for the countercultural hub of this heaven on earth. But there's nothing going on. A huge mural blocks the Mississippi. The few people wandering around look as disappointed as I am. The only real action is the two huge billiard halls in an Italian restaurant where a troublingly well-behaved 50 Styles wedding party is gathering on the street. I check out a few hotels but can't imagine checking into any of them. I check out a few restaurants but can't imagine eating in any of them. I've already driven 12 hours and 615 miles, some of which, by the way, is on the Trail of Tears, only to arrive in a town where the most illuminating sign claims that it was the birthplace of Rush Limbaugh. This is the last straw. Clearly, I am now so disconnected from my intuition that I'm deludedly spinning profound portents out of simple encounters with stoned hitchhikers. My disappointment is as palpable as it is irrational. I have to get out of Cape Girardeau. And so I cross the river into Illinois, where after yet another hour of driving, I check into a nondescript hotel near the Marion Penitentiary, which is populated by about 50 death row inmates, as well as members of the Aryan Brotherhood, El Rookins, the Mexican Mafia, and DC Blacks. I feel like I've escaped. So that's enough about what it felt like. How are we doing? No one's going to stop me yet. Let's talk a little bit about diagnosis, because people might realize that, well, two things. Well, it says it here, but diagnosis is a crapshoot. Doesn't matter whether you're a Western, Eastern, or a mother-in-law, grandmother, Jewish grandmother. No one knows what's going on. To even begin to understand diagnostics, we have to go boldly forth where few lay people have gone before, to the infamous Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, the DSM. The American Psychiatric Association publishes the DSM in a well-intentioned attempt to provide a linear classification system for our multidimensional minds. It's 886 pages long, lists 297 disorders, and sits on most psychiatrists' desks or over on the bookshelf, even if he or she just uses the online version. It's as important for establishing their credibility as those diplomas on the wall. The manual is based on extensive, one could say OCD, collaborations between psychiatric professionals all over the country. They analyze countless research reports, clinical trials, and various subjective criteria in order to assign labels to what ails us. While those of us on the other side of the looking glass may rebel against the restraints of those labels, the criteria do at least give psychiatrists some kind of common language for discussing our behavior. DSM number 1 was published in 1952, the year I was born, which I consider prescient and timely, even though I wasn't officially diagnosed until 47 years later. As of this writing, DSM-5 is about to be released. While some popular diagnoses may be eliminated or more likely lumped together, there will also be more total diagnoses. Many people consider this a plot by the so-called medical establishment and big pharma to sell more drugs. But clearly they're just suffering from paranoid personality disorder. 300.1. There's a lot of understandable disagreement about what should be included, like paraphilia NOS, that's 302.9. While a bad case of paraphilia could easily interfere with your everyday functioning, being sexually obsessed with specific acts or objects seems technically okay as long as nobody and or no thing gets hurt. But paraphiliac rape isn't included because if you call it a mental illness, then people convicted of it could plead insanity, which happens to be, on the side, one of the big controversies about the DSM. What's a mental illness? Can you plead, mental illness in a defense? While on the subject, I'd like to bring up the issue of hypersexuality. All in favor raise their hands, or something. It's sure a more polite term than what you'd hear in some bars or on talk radio to describe women whose interest in sex exceeds our society's shifting and often self-serving norms. Plus, don't guys also deserve a more polite way of being accused of thinking with our balls instead of our brains? Are they suggesting we should get our Viagra with a side order of Valium? And who is the hypersexual psychiatric clown who decided that hypo, low sexual desire disorder, 302.71, and sexual aversion disorder, 302.79, do earn labels? After all, they say up to 10% of people are simply not interested in having sex. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't qualify for voyeurism. That's 302.82. As much fun as it is to poke fun at the DSM, doing so is clearly a sign of oppositional defiant disorder, 313.81. More important, it's another reflection of the challenge of treating us. If we're going to talk about this stuff, we have to have a language to do so. And the DSM is a worthy attempt to create that language out of shimmering synaptic whole cloth. And frankly, the terms are way more specific than nutty as a fruitcake, retard, head case, loony, mong, and bonkers. Note, the most important thing about the DSM is that it gives doctors a code to put down when they're billing your insurance company. No code, no reimbursement. And don't forget to check whether your prescriptions need pre-approval. But I digress. See avoidant personality disorder, 301.82. Okay, so you want the funny stuff. That changes everything. Oh, no, this is serious. See if I can find something funny. No, we'll read something serious. It's good for Putney. Okay, fine, thanks. There's a little bit about treatment, alternative, traditional, sort of combined in terms of sort of the philosophy of treatment. There's a whole lot in here, which you can look at later. The mind-body connection is real, and it goes every which way. The idea that every part of you is implicated in your mental illness is humbling but empowering. Because while it explains why there's no panacea, in the process it restores your own intuition to its rightful place as the ultimate arbiter of your own care. Say you have weak adrenals, thanks or no thanks to something that happened to mom during her pregnancy. Over the course of your life, your adrenals have become increasingly stressed by environment, diet, life circumstances, and/or other factors, until by now they're thoroughly compromised. If those weak adrenals are one of the proximate causes of your anxiety, you may be helped by anything from body work to taking licorice root. If, however, some childhood trauma is constantly pumping out traumatic childhood memory vibes into your whole system, no amount of body work or licorice root is going to provide a long-term care until you deal with that. On the other hand, if your adrenals are totally shot, maybe you need to heal them while you're doing the therapy you need to do to release those childhood traumas. And if you're binge drinking, you may have to go to Alcoholics Anonymous to get a handle on that first, or else you'll keep missing your therapy appointments. And maybe you can't deal with any of this until you find a medication that lowers your cortisol levels or raises your dopamine levels. In other words, the issue isn't necessarily figuring out what's going to work. It's making your best determination of the most effective way to begin untangling this tangled web. Some people with mental illness might be helped by a prescription drug. Others, a drug and a therapist. Others, an herb and acupuncture. Others, blood pressure medication and a 2-week vacation. Others, a regular meditation practice. And others, the spiritual karmic purging of their choice. Or any of the many combinations of the above. The important thing is that there's a wide range of places where you can introduce some healing. There's no absolute right way. Rest assured that in some way, no matter how inscrutably personal or even karmic, you are doing exactly the right thing for you. There's no need to suffer the truly debilitating anxiety that can come from thinking you might be doing the wrong thing. There are times, of course, if you pose a threat to yourself or to others, that others might want to intervene. Hamlet, for example, felt the only cure for his misery was karmic intervention, which involved killing his two-timing Uncle Claudius and committing suicide. I'm not sure either licorice root, Valium, or family therapy could have helped, but who knows? I know there were probably times I would have felt better faster if I'd done what some person, book, or website told me, and other times when I took advice that increased my suffering. But ultimately, I'd rather follow my own intuition and own innate intelligence, informed by any knowledge I can garner, advice I can get, and experience I've had, than live chained to the idea that someone else always knows what's best for me. To quote the 14th century alchemist Paracelsus, or 16th century, one of those, to quote Paracelsus, if you're not your own man, you're someone else's. That was his motto, and he was a doctor. Agitated depression is sort of what made the most sense to me. If I was bipolar, I was hypomanic, low mania instead of bipolar. I was bipolar too, okay? But I said to my doctor once, I said, well, if I'm bipolar, where's the fun manic part? He said, well, there's euphoria and then there's dysphoria. So I was depressed and then I was really screaming depressed. Overlapping cyclothymia. I don't know if you know this stuff. I have a whole list.
Well, I mean, explain it to us in terms of how did it actualize? How did you live as a person with
Good question. I look back at that. At one point when I was writing this, I said to Wendy, do you think I'm overstating this a little? And she said, no, if anything, you're understating it. I think that a lot of it is that thing I started to talk about. I have a whole thing about masking. You do. I mean, there are people here that are depressed like this, you know? There are people that take care of them. You mask. You figure out. You take your measure. And people have said, you know, I'm brave for doing this. But the thing you have to remember is that I had left my job. I was doing my own writing. If Wendy hadn't dumped me by then, she probably wasn't going to dump me now. We had a house. I wasn't a single parent coming home to 2 kids who could barely get to work that could get fired and have gotten fired the next day. Okay? So, in other words, I could go back. I could hide. You know? Later in the day was better. The worst time was 4, 5, 6, 7 in the morning. By 6, 7, William Steyer has a great line about the evening something is a blessing. You know, around 5, 6.
time for a cocktail?
Well, it's 5 o'clock, yeah, try. I don't know if that helps you. I don't know how I got through the day. I mean, remember driving in the van, you just keep going. It's like this other person is following you along all the time. And it's, you can ignore, I mean, he's just there. I mean, if you want to play squash, you're like, you're trying to play squash too. You know, he'll just be there. And I don't know how to describe it. When I think back, I don't know how. But I see people going through this. And it's something you get used to in some twisted way. There's always this thing in you. I would work at this other business, I'd consult there, and I'd get in the car and scream. You know, you just hold it in like you'd hold in. Answer? Yeah?
You seem, at least you didn't mention a problem with sleep. Maybe I didn't listen well enough.
No.
But apparently, I'm definitely depressive, but not bipolar.
Right.
And I know that my sleep is very much, it takes over.
Yeah.
And
You sleep a lot or you don't sleep?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a classic depressive. That's why it's hard, you know, my journey through the dark wood of agitated depression, dysphoria, manic, you know, it didn't seem like a good title. So we say depression, and there's so many ways to say it.
Can you talk into the microphone?
Oh, I'm having so much fun. I'm not a classic depressive. I'm more of a hypomanic, light mania, deep depression. But I have never had trouble sleeping. And yet, I'm a lucky man. I've never had trouble sleeping, but it's a 4 a.m. wake-up call. That's when I can't sleep. Then, you know, that's the best way I can describe it. I mean, I've taken all the different sleeping meds. I like clonazepam personally. But I think that for physicians, okay, there are 2 things. One, find someone in the vaguely, at least, healing arts that you trust. I don't care if it's a doctor. I don't care if it's your minister. But someone who will hang in there with you. Just stay there with you, that you can talk to, that won't think you're crazy, even though you are, that will just stay there with you, try, advise. I know that you're a doctor, and I think that as long as doctors understand that everyone's different, and to me, the doctors who prescribe are the best. I think they're like homeopaths. I think they sense that someone is a certain kind of depressive. The doctors I've said this to say that's not true, but I don't believe it. They sense how to prescribe. But if it's alternative, that's fine too. But find someone you really trust that's going to just stay with you. They'll talk to you if you call at 10 o'clock at night, or at least call you the next morning. As far as friends go, again, there's a lot in here. It's a big issue. Friends, relatives, family, children, they're all different. And for good friends, they really just have to, you have to, how do I not use the word honor? You have to respect what they're going through as an important part of the human condition. If you start there and you realize it's not that they're sick so much, they want to feel different, but if you respect the fact that what they're going through is as important as what you're going through, is as important as what President Obama's going through, you just stay with them. And then when they ask for help, you open to that. That's a very vague answer, but it's really difficult. The question is whether masking helped or if long run it made it worse. I don't think it made it worse. I think that if I had masked from all my friends, from everyone, if I tried to pretend it wasn't there, I don't know how I could have. I think a lot of regular depressives do that because they don't have anyone they trust. The two problems are we don't have a language for it, and we're afraid of the consequences. I'm not. I wasn't going to lose my job. I probably wasn't going to lose my family. I don't think masking makes it worse. I think it's positive in the sense that you develop some skills so you're not constantly, I knew I could go to a meeting for an hour and pull it off. So that was one thing I didn't have to worry about. I don't know how to describe it anyway. It's you have to do it. You have to do it. And I don't think it's a problem. It's funny because we had this call-in on BPR, and one of the people that called was someone I worked with. She said, I worked with you until 1996. I didn't know you were like that. And I owned a company, as I said on the phone. You know, I might have fired myself, but I think it was hard for her to realize I'd been going through more classic depression at that time, but it wouldn't have helped to bring them all into that drama. The whole thing of the book is that you can't judge how another person deals with their depression. I did a lot of other stuff, and as I've always said, really, I really have to say it? As I've always said, that I never did an alternative therapy that didn't help. There's some herbs, actually, that are problematic, but I never did one that didn't help. They didn't hold. They'd hold for a day, a week. After that, meds were the only thing that really held for me. There's a lot to say about alternative alternative and traditional medicine. It's much more complicated than we think. There are many more neurotransmitters than just serotonin. They work different ways. I think the one thing we talk about, I think we've gotten to the point where alternative healers are beginning to trust doctors and doctors trust alternative healers in a way that never happened. I'm not sure we've gotten to the point that they really understand how each other's modalities work on you so that they can bring them together. Actually, when I had my crack in October, I was taking Chinese herbs, and my acupuncturist said, be careful, which I was. She said, because they might be synergistic. I think there's a lot of work to do on that instead of just trying to figure out, well, which is better. Because there's a good combination. When I look back at myself in college, I was a real depressive. You know, more classic. I would sleep to 11, 12, whatever. But, you know, I went 30 years where I never saw a Western doctor or an Eastern doctor, smoked cigarettes, drank, you know, worked out. Is that self-medication or is it medication? I've done 10 years on prescription drugs. I did 30 on self-medication. I think I'm a better doctor. I'm sorry, it's an issue. It's an issue, but yeah, people self-medicate. At what point is it problematic? It's different for everyone. And I know a lot of people, if they drink one drink, they're an alcoholic. I can tell you that alcohol is a depressant, but a slightly different system. Okay? There are people that take antidepressants that they can't drink. I've never seen an antidepressant warning label that says, if you're going to take these pills, get smashed every night. It's the only way they'll work. Okay? But I also know people that take them. Everyone's different. That's all I can say. I'll say it again and again. Are there people you need to know as part of your healing? And are there people that are going to start coming up to you all the time? I mean, ever since the article came out, everyone that goes by me goes the other side of the street. It's not really helpful. But I think you're right. I think you two both touch on. You really have to take your measure a lot in these things. I did some stuff with acupuncture with the magnetics, but no, I didn't. There's so many things I didn't do. It's too bad because it would have been a better book. 2 times my psychiatrist suggested I go to inpatient, Dartmouth Hitchcock for 2 weeks. And each time I said no, and in retrospect, now that I'm out and I've written a book, I mean, people have gotten whole books out of that. I can't believe I didn't do it. I'm going to keep going because they're going to yell at me otherwise, okay? Creativity and depression. Imagine how suspicious I was when my psychiatrist assured me that medications wouldn't dampen my creativity, they'd make it more mature. Mature? For me, that implied a lack of intensity, a medicated distance that people are always warning you about. Imagining my creative life without at least some profound contemplative melancholia was like imagining I had different parents. It's not that I wanted to be depressed all the time. I certainly didn't want to end up committing suicide like a shocking number of poets, writers, artists, musicians. It's just that I was concerned that I'd get, well, a little vapid. Surely as a serious writer, I still needed to spend a respectable amount of time stumbling blindly in the darkness, questioning my very reason for being. But while I still loathe the word maturity in relation to myself in any context, he was right. I know that for many bipolar and schizophrenic patients, medications replace wildly creative visions with lethargic stupor. I'm one of the luckier ones. They haven't dampened my waves of creative thought or my enthusiasm for getting them down on paper. They just make the torrent of words easier to manage, arrange, carve, and shape. They help me listen to the reader as closely as I listen to myself. Peter Kramer, the well-known author of Beyond Depression and Listening to Prozac, argues that people suffering from one or more flavors of mental illness would have been more creative without suffering them in the first place. He says that since the relationship between melancholia and creativity has been ennobled since ancient times, we can't imagine life without it. Kramer can imagine it. Having seen so many of his patients' creativity emerge after years buried under the chaotic thinking of depression, he turns our whole understanding of what it means to be a profound creative thinker inside out, with depression clearly on the outs. I'm curious about the implications of having never been depressed, but I'm not yet ready to tell my fellow dysfunctional manic melancholics to find another line of work. In terms of creativity, we're just here to serve, to reflect the world as we experience it. In a way, it doesn't matter what that world is or even how we experience it. Our job is to just keep polishing our own particular mirror. Creativity isn't limited to one particular state, medium, or reality. As far as I'm concerned, the more the merrier. The emotional arc from deep depression through everyday emotional balance to psychotic mania is so seamless, I defy anyone to determine what it means to be in a creative state. The fact that, over the last 20 years, we've unsuccessfully tried through text messaging to reduce human emotions to a few hundred emoticons is a testament, a welcome one in my opinion, to our infinite complexity. Writing, music, art, dance come from the whole of us, whoever we are, wherever we are, whatever time we live in, whatever medications we may or may not be taking. Creative spirits play the hands that are dealt them. They couldn't have it any other way, even if they wanted to. You know, Dante had the most famous breakdown in world history, and what's amazing is not only did he have the most famous breakdown, midway through life's journey, I found myself in a dark wood, he went through the whole thing in 3 days between Good Friday and Easter, 1301, I think. So anyway, I thought you should know it can be done quicker than I did. The Divine Comedy is best known as a glorious spiritual journey. Indeed, many people who consider religion or spirituality to be a major focus of their lives say that their quest began when they became lost in their own version of Dante's Dark Wood, or Dark Night of the Soul, as St. John of the Cross put it in the 16th century. Even Eckhart Tolle, the author of the best-selling Power of Now books, tells the story of how he experienced his spiritual awakening after years of alternating depression and anxiety. That's why I suggest, only partly in jest, that some kind of emotional breakdown may be as direct a path to the experience of enlightenment as 6 years under a Bodhi tree, 40 days and nights in a desert, 7-day sessions at a Zen center, 3-day vision quests in the middle of nowhere, and or beating yourself up by trying to put your attention on the now. The role that deep depression often plays in spiritual or personal transformation has led many people to suggest that we should meditate, not medicate away the pain, that those dark nights are part of being human. In fact, one of the most meaningful parts of being human. Whenever I read words to this effect, I wonder if the writer knows or remembers what major depression really feels like. It hurts, okay? It hurts. To be fair, meditation can be an excellent therapy for anxiety and depression, whether it involves following your breath, chanting, repeating a soothing mantra, reciting a heartfelt prayer, watching a sunset, or just lying on the ground and looking up at the clouds. However, few would recommend withholding medication from people with headaches, broken legs, heart disease, or cancer, arguing if they just suck it up and transcend the pain, they might reach some kind of enlightened healing. But for some reason, we're worried that madness, meditation, and medication don't mix. During my 20s and 30s, I spent countless hours, probably about 4,000 now that I think of it, sitting with my legs crossed, watching my breath, and trying to still my mind. In the process, I frequently had moments of madness and transcendence, occasionally simultaneously. So at first, I believed that I could handle my breakdown with a kind of equanimity that most people couldn't even dream of. That even in the midst of my darkest nights, the real me would remain detached, fully aware of its own true self, like a Zen master sitting on his cushion in the midst of a hurricane. But as I learned early on, you can't get up from the cushion and walk away from agitated depression when the bell rings. This inability to calmly bear witness to my mixed states just intensified my feelings of inadequacy. When a fellow traveler kindly and curiously asked why I didn't just sit with it in the way we'd both been trained, I wrote back, "So you ask, what about simply being in the now, sinking fully into the moment, no matter how uncomfortable? Yes, I agree, I want to. Lord knows I want to. But I've learned that trying to do so now is, for me, at best, a prayer, because the experience invariably continues whether I'm trying or not trying. It's surprising and frustrating that virtually all the people I now go to for guidance encourage me not to do anything and not to feel guilty about doing nothing. They say I should certainly take care of myself, eat good food, get outside, regular healthy human stuff, but that sometimes it's fine to just take some Valium and pull the covers over my head. Patience, I hear again and again, just patience. Resistance is futile. They've all said in one way or another, watch bad movies, read bad books, just be patient and let the storm pass through you. What a mysterious path for someone like me, huh? I mean, how the hell is the universe going to respond to a guy who's constantly equivocating, shuffling his feet, saying it doesn't matter, and crying every chance he gets? There must be something I can do. Can't I at least be the one who surrenders? No, they're saying. They're saying that the idea of my trying to do anything in the sense that I have the power is in this case a little off the mark. That's not the lesson. At least when I rest in the bright light they all assure me is coming, I'll be under no illusions that I brought myself there through sheer force of my own creativity, intelligence, insight, or efforts. I'll know in my bones that it was and is, rather, through sheer grace, I am again able to experience the unspeakable joy of being alive, of being grateful, and having compassion for all other beings. At one point, I had a theory that the Divine Comedy was not the book that Dante had actually written, that rather it was the public book, an expurgated version that he created for the contemporary church and state. Perhaps, I thought, there was a secret text of the book, hidden in some monastery or castle somewhere, that would, like an Egyptian papyrus, eventually see the light of day. Okay. In a few months, where are my notes? In May, Dan Brown has another book coming out. Dan Brown went to Amherst. Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code, I'm sorry. Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code, has a book coming out. It's called The Inferno. I went to Amherst. Dan Brown went to Amherst. His initials are DB. My initials are DB. There are several. We were both born in June. We both have aquiline noses, and we're both writers. So I'm glad a lot of people are here. His book is my plot. Because there is no Dante, they don't have one in his own hand. So, it'd be interesting. And maybe it is that it wasn't the book he wrote. Let me read you a quick Dante piece that might give you an idea. You're all an idea, and then I can stop. I built this not just around hell, purgatory, and paradise, because I realized the book was a lot more complicated than that. And I divided it into 7 sections. And this is called Heaven on Earth. The reason it's called Heaven on Earth is that in Dante's, in the Divine Comedy, the Garden of Eden is in purgatory. It's not in paradise, it's in purgatory. That's how twisted this book is. For Dante, even the Garden of Eden is in purgatory, a place where you have to pay some final dues before being allowed into paradise. It's here that Dante finally sees Beatrice. Instead of the rapturous reunion he's been dreaming of all these years, she puts the hammer down. She insists that he admit he's guilty to all kinds of sins and random idiocies, particularly the fact that back when they were mere children, he mistook his puppy-love fantasies of her earthly flesh for the radiance of God. She also explains that the only reason she went to the trouble of setting Virgil down to get him was a touch of pity, and more important, that one of her jobs was to reveal the truth to some half-decent poet so he could go back and share the good and bad news with the rest of humanity. After a while, you wish he'd tell her, well, shut up. Since when did beings of pure light become such nags? Enough already. But no, Dante just takes it as pitifully as an adolescent who's been caught by his dream girl satisfying his more carnal desires with a girl on the wrong side of the tracks. He keeps groveling, and not just for one purgative scene, but for canto after canto, even into Paradise, where he simply trades in guilt for self-deprecation. Oddly, back here on Earth, this is the period when Dante begins to act a little more empowered. He's around 50, still in exile, still wandering the roads of Italy, following the path of his own private purgatory. While usually less than 100 miles from Florence, he remains a world apart. But then he gets a message from back home. The city fathers say he can return, but there are two catches. One, he has to pay a large fine. More significantly, he has to admit he was wrong. He refuses. Here's a guy who walks stooped over on the first terrace of purgatory in solidarity with people guilty of the sin of pride, but he still has too much pride to make a simple apology. Actually, you couldn't pay him enough to go back to Florence, let alone have him pay you. And as for being wrong, those people don't have a clue what it really means to confess. Plus, Dante's no fool. He knows that his reputation is growing. The Florentines will want to claim him for their own. Even after he dies, they spend years trying to get their hands on his remains, which are in Ravenna, Italy. To paraphrase Elvis Costello, Dante would have been disgusted. Now he's just amused. He doesn't have time for this anymore. He's no longer dreaming about going back. He's dreaming about going forward. But before Beatrice is willing to escort him into Paradise, he has to drink from the waters of the rivers Lethe and Uno. I was wondering today if that's pronounced Uno, but anyway, the rivers Lethe and Uno. The first, as we just mentioned, washes away his recollections of his sin. The second firmly implants the memories of how good he's been. Okay, so the first washes away his recollections. The second implants his memories of how good he's been, which might imply you have to be in total denial to get into heaven. How can you write about things you don't remember? This conundrum has vaguely troubled Dante and scholars for many years. Some point out that Beatrice was really just saying he had to forget his own sins, to hold firmly to his own goodness, in order to have the clarity and stamina to rake everyone else across the coals. Others suggest that since his memory was good and he was allowed to hold on to his strengths, he can remember his memories, an argument that, if nothing else, explains why I wasn't cut out for academia. All I can say is that after major cataclysms, whether inner or outer, you are literally no longer the same person. Many aspects of yourself, fears, troubling memories, resentments, all those little things you feel have been tucked away, holding you back, making life more difficult in so many different ways, have been dislodged. This is your opportunity to let those sins go, sins in quotes, while setting more firmly the foundations of your life going forward. It would be nice to think that a quick dip in 2 rivers would take care of all this. I suppose in the case of spontaneous enlightenments, that may happen. But I dare say for most of us, it's an ongoing process. We may only have a few major cataclysms in our lives, but we always have opportunities to acknowledge, embrace, or make light of our thousands of unnecessary sufferings. In other words, ours is not one long descent into hell and another long climb up Mount Purgatory to paradise. Rather, we go a few steps forward and then some back. Admittedly, for many people, there seems to come a time when they just hunker down for the duration. But whether for the first 10 or first 100 years, for just one or many lifetimes, our pilgrim's progress is an incremental process as we slowly get lighter and lighter, clearer and clearer. That's it. Thank you.